You're listening to I Heard It on the 806, a podcast by John Bowers. In the early 1990s, the Lord began to open doors for a new kind of relationship between Christ-centered church and a church called Bethel Gospel Assembly in Harlem, New York. It all started as an act of obedience when John led a high school ministry team to New York City to do street evangelism in one of the city's roughest neighborhoods. Here's John sharing the amazing testimony of the things God did when they obeyed the direction of His Spirit.
In 1992, Christ Center elders in the month of March were praying about where we would send our high school kids that wanted to volunteer and go out on street ministries, street evangelistic times. Had heard the Lord tell us to go to Harlem, New York. And so I had made contact with a church in Harlem, New York called Bethel Gospel Assembly. The pastor was Bishop Ezra Nehemiah Williams, had been there from the beginning of the church. He created the church. And tremendous, powerful church in Harlem, New York, had been there for years and years, started back in the 60s. And the bishop was influential throughout the community. And so when he heard that we had offered ourselves to come, and if we could rent a basement place in his church. He had a large church, square block in downtown Harlem, 2 gymnasiums, large auditorium that would hold close to 1,500 people, a cafeteria. It had everything we needed. On that March then of 1992, we took our kids to Harlem, New York, and it was at that time that I met Ezra Nehemiah Williams. And he let me know that it was very, very unusual for him to have invited a white pastor to bring 26 white kids to his church because he had given up on the white pastor, the white evangelist. He'd given up on reconciliation because he had tried and it didn't work and it had failed, and he had basically given up on any white pastor joining ranks with him. Interesting thing took place. As we went out on the streets of Harlem, New York, we drew massive crowds. In fact, they were so large that we actually had to have ropes to keep the people away from the drama production. And even police had to come and help control the traffic. And it was amazing what took place in parks and on streets all over Harlem, New York. And so as we were finishing up our one production that morning, I'd prayed, and we had 2 vans full of kids. They were in costume. Their faces were painted. They were ready to go to the next concert scheduled place, which we didn't know where it was, because we would stop and pray. God, where do you want us to go? As we were driving down the main thoroughfare in Harlem, New York, I just sensed the Lord told me to get off the main street and drive on the back streets. So we did. We come across this ginormous grade school, public grade school. And I just sensed that I was to stop and go in and introduce myself and see if we could somehow put the drama on around the school or even in the school. So I went up to the office and asked to meet the principal. They asked me if I had an appointment. I said I didn't. They said, well, you're going to need to have an appointment to see her. And I says, well, I'm only in New York for a short time, and we're out traveling on the streets, and I just sensed that the Lord led me here to talk to the principal about putting on a drama. Little did I know that the principal's door was open, and she was listening to me as I was talking to the secretary and the receptionist in the front office. And they said, well, we're sorry, Mr. Bowers, you're going to have an appointment to see the principal. Plus, we can't put on you wouldn't be allowed to put on any drama here without us knowing who you are and having all the documents sent in ahead of time so that we could research exactly what your program is about. I understood that. I said, well, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And as I turned to walk out, this rather large African-American lady appeared and said, Mr. Bowers, could I talk to you? And I said, well, sure, not knowing she was the principal. She said, I just overheard you talking to our receptionist here and that you want to put a drama on. Would you come into my office? Went into the office, shut the door, and she says, what brings you to Harlem, first of all, with these white kids I heard you talk about putting on a drama. So I explained to her that every year we go out into the different parts of the country and we put on this drama and we evangelize and bring people to Jesus. She said, well, are you aware this is a public school and that we couldn't allow you to come in and preach Jesus in a public school? I said, well, I don't know why you couldn't. If you wanted to, as the principal, you could do that. I said, public school, private school, whatever it is, we're here to present Jesus. And if you would be open to it, I think you'd be blessed. How many students do you have? And she says, well, we have 750 students in our school, grades 1 through 7. Well, I said, I'd sure love to do a national assembly if you'd want to call it that. She says, well, our national assemblies are scheduled 1 year in advance, and we're right on schedule. So, Mr. Bowers, we wouldn't be able to entertain the offer that you have presented, but I want to thank you for coming. And I would ask that maybe next year, if you decide to come back to Harlem, that maybe you could contact me a year in advance and give me some more information, and maybe I could schedule you someplace else in the city, maybe some parks or some other areas that you might be able to put on the drama. And God bless you, and trust that you'll have a safe trip as you continue to do your ministry. Graciously thanked her. Heading out the door, and as I'm walking down the hallway, the same lady said, Mr. Bowers. I turned, and there she was, the same principal. And she said, Mr. Bowers, would you come back to my office? So I went back into her office, and she said, Mr. Bowers, if you've got enough guts to come to my school and come in here and present to me that you have a Christian drama that you want to put on in a public school building, then I've got enough guts to put you on my stage. She said, would you wait right here for a second? As she opened the door and she addressed the secretary, the receptionist out in front, she said, make an announcement immediately that all the students are to come to the assembly hall right now, and we're going to have a national assembly right now. It was announced. She said, get your cast ready, put them on the stage. I went out and got the 2 vans unloaded. We were on the stage. 750 students plus faculty came out and filled the auditorium. We put on the drama. She's sitting right beside me on the front row. And as soon as the drama was over, she looks over to me with tears in her eyes. And she says, what are we going to do now? We can't have an altar call, but we've got to have an altar call. What are we going to do? And I said, well, my students are trained. Why don't we let the students go out into the audience and let the audience come to the students? Because we'll have 1 and 2 meet with a group of 5 to 10, and we can spread out all over the audience, 26 kids. And even some faculty that we have brought with us could answer any questions they might have. That took place. Absolutely amazing. Hundreds of kids gave their hearts to Jesus that day. And the principal asked me then, after spending approximately an hour mingling with the students, she said, would you do me a favor, Mr. Bowers? Would you let your kids stay here? Because we had arrived about 11 o'clock in the morning. She said, would you allow your students to stay here and eat with my students? And then would you allow them to stay and meet in the classrooms and also meet on the playground? We spent the rest of the afternoon in that public school system. Oh, people, listen to what I'm saying. Jesus, when he makes a scheduled assignment, it's his assignment, and public school or not, has no power against the hand of God. When he says, go, go. If it's stop at a public school, stop at a public school. And he spoke to the principal. She made the changes that needed to be made for a national assembly that takes a year to plan in advance, to do it spontaneously. What a glorious day that was.
You've been listening to the I Heard It on the 806 podcast with John Bowers. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen. To learn more about John Bowers, this podcast, and to find out how you can get a copy of his new book, I Heard It on the 806, go to ihearditonthe806.com. This has been an Avenue 153 production.